Awesome. And of course, our guest this afternoon, he is a respected policymaker and advocate committed to fighting for environmental justice, climate mitigation, public health, and political education to uplift vulnerable communities. Professionally, he is an author, lecturer, policy advisor, and community advocate with 20 years of experience specializing in environmental issues, economic policy, and utility regulation. Politically, he was the 2020 Democratic nominee for the Georgia Public Service Commission, where he garnered more votes than any African American in Georgia history. In 2016, he became the first person of color to run for office in Forsyth County, Georgia, and the first Democrat to run there in 30 years. He served with the Obama administration's Clean Power Plan and Power Africa initiative, and served as an advisor to the Congressional Black Caucus and EPA on environmental justice issues. He was also one of 65 world leaders invited to Vatican City to discuss the global impact of the climate crisis ahead of the Paris Climate Accords. He has been a guest lecturer at the United States Institute of Peace, Netroots Nation, Clark Atlanta University, Morehouse College, Tuskegee University, George Washington University, Howard University, Spelman College, and the University of Georgia. Currently, he is a board member of the ACLU of Georgia, board chair of the Sierra Club of Georgia Executive Committee, and an alumnus of Clark Atlanta University. We are very excited to welcome Mr. Daniel Blackman to YDSA at Georgia Tech. And Mr. Blackman, if you have any words to say before we get into the questions, I open the floor to you.
No, I'm looking forward to the conversation. Thank you so much for the introduction, and happy to talk about the country and climate change. And I'm excited about the fact that you guys are a chapter on a college campus right here in Georgia. So shout out to Georgia Tech and to DSA and to the work that you guys are doing. And thank you, Gracie, for making time away from your class.
Thank you so much. Now you can add Georgia Tech to your list of many, many guest lecture colleges. Okay, awesome. Then we will get started with the questions we have prepared. And then once we go through all of them, we will open the floor to any other participants who want to ask a question in the Q&A section. Cool. So our first question, what are some of the biggest issues relating to the environment that Georgia is currently facing?
I mean, I think Georgia, like the rest of the world, has been tremendously impacted by climate change. I think when we talk about environmental issues as a whole, we have to look to the impacts that have been directly on our state, such as the coal ash challenges that we face around our state, looking at various environmental justice issues, specifically that deal with emissions and carbon pollution. When you look at major cities like Los Angeles and Washington, D.C., New York, these cities have, as they have grown, have caused more of a burden, not only on the energy grid, but on the air quality and on the water quality. And when you have Black and brown kids in the United States that are getting asthma 4 and 5 times the national rate, that's a huge problem. I don't think people realize that if the southern states were a country, we would be the 11th most polluted country in the world. And so when you look at the amount of challenges that a state like Georgia faces, when we look at, a city that is growing, and rightfully so, like Atlanta, but we don't have any more room to just put more cars in. I'm not thankful at all to the pandemic, but the pandemic for a large amount of time took a lot of cars off of many of Atlanta's busiest roadways. And we need to make sure from an environmental standpoint, we look at infrastructure. Georgia is growing, the country is growing, but Georgia is growing at an accelerated rate. And I think that as we look towards infrastructure such as public transportation, ways to get more of our emissions off the road, I think those are areas that are very important. I think the expansion of nuclear plant Vogtle is a challenge, which I'm sure we'll talk about later. To our friends in Burke County, Georgia, Burke County is one of the poorest counties east of the Mississippi River. When you look at areas like Burke County, which is in the shadow of Plant Vogtle, when you look at Juliet, Georgia, which has had a tremendous burden with coal ash, when you look at places all over this state, specifically in our rural areas, I think there are challenges within itself. And we have to look at this opportunity, which I think it is. While we are in a climate crisis, I think it also opens the door for innovation, for opportunity, for technology, and for really, really, great people like those of you that go to Georgia Tech and the HBCUs within the Metro Atlanta area and other colleges. We're in a very interesting time in history where we can be a part of the solution, not the problem. So I'm very happy to be here. I think this is a great conversation. I'm looking forward to expanding it beyond Georgia and talking about our country and all the policies that are in place that are going to really impact each of our generations and each of our communities.
Wonderful. What a great introductory answer. Thank you. So our second question, what policies do you have in mind when you think of the Green New Deal? Um,
Okay, yeah, I thought you were. I thought there was another part to that particular
so
question.
did I.
No, no, I think that, look, President Biden has recently released a plan that looks at infrastructure in America. The American Jobs Plan that he has, I think, has a tremendous opportunity to meet us at the intersection of the climate crisis and of infrastructure in our country. But let me be very clear: the climate crisis that we're facing today, we cannot face without understanding the importance and the relevance of inequality, of socioeconomic challenges and despair that many people have faced. When you look at what recently happened during the COVID pandemic that we are still in and prayerfully navigating our way out of, I think one of the biggest things that we realized was how much of an impact is caused when poor communities that have been economically, socially, and economically left behind. Look at Albany, Georgia, for example. When you look at a city like Albany and Dougherty County, Georgia, where poverty is upwards in the high 50s, low 60s percentage of those individuals, those families, those workers that live in those areas, we have to understand that those are the kind of barriers that allow people to recover faster. When I think of the Green New Deal, I think of a great opportunity for us to bring together the climate conversation with science, but also to bring together compassion. Dr. King, who's a native of Atlanta, and Bobby Kennedy were killed 61 days apart, and they were fighting for similar issues. One specifically was poverty in America. Bobby Kennedy had done his Poor People's, I'm sorry, his Poor Cities tour, where he was traveling around the United States to the poorest cities in America. And as we all know, Dr. King died in Memphis, Tennessee, fighting for sanitation workers because he believed that the fight beyond racial justice and racial equality was social equality. He had a plan to address poverty. What we've seen in the United States over the last several decades, and even longer, is one group, one segment of society getting very wealthy. And on the other side of that spectrum, health being compromised, economic welfare being compromised, wages that are comparable to the growth of Wall Street, while we see executives that have gotten very wealthy off of the fossil fuel industry and a lack of a prioritization of a strategy and a focus on clean energy. I think that has put us in a very compromised situation. It doesn't matter if you're a Democrat, a Republican, a socialist, or you're not political at all. I think we have to understand that legislation like the Green New Deal might not be perfect, but if we're not being more aggressive, then we will find ourselves in a much worse position. I mean, when you have an administration, Donald Trump's administration, under his leadership, 122 environmental regulations were either cut or dismantled. When you have a lack of economic protections in place and an EPA that was in place prior to the Biden administration and after the Obama administration that literally got rid of the majority, if not all of its scientists that worked at the EPA and the Department of Energy. And you have individuals that turn a blind eye to environmental regulations and enforcement. You have individuals at the corporate level that live by a quote that says it's hard for a man to understand a thing when his salary depends on him not understanding it. So you now have a space where individuals are working, making a lot of money, and they're not understanding the science. They're not understanding poverty, not because it doesn't exist, not because 77 million people in America live at or below poverty. 1.9 million of those live right here in Georgia. But you find yourself in a very challenging space where now we're a very profitable and prosperous country, but we're doing it at the detriment of working people that are suffering, whether you're poor and white in rural America, or you're a poor black kid in Southwest Atlanta, or you're a poor Latino kid in North Georgia. It doesn't matter your culture or your background. We're all suffering. And I think we need to make sure that we pay attention to opportunities like the Green New Deal that really accelerate three areas, in my opinion. Number one, the opportunity for expansion and manufacturing of green technology and the investment therein. The number two, the opportunity for us to have cleaner communities and cleaner cities, which isn't a Democratic or Republican issue; it's a human issue. And lastly, but definitely not least, a tremendous opportunity for us to accelerate ourselves into the future by transforming industries that quite frankly have contributed a lot to the problem. And to those who are with unions and other workers who have worked in the coal industry, we want to just transition where there's education, there's inclusion, and there's opportunity. As we transition away from coal and other fossil fuels, we need to have plans in place that can really speak to these issues. And I think the most important way to do that is exactly what Georgia did on January 5th: elect individuals that understand the climate crisis and that will focus on making sure that they listen to the science and they pass policies and laws that add to expanding our infrastructure and opportunities, and not stand as barriers to people's life expectancy and ability to just live their lives to the best of their ability.
Yeah, wonderful answers. And our next question goes very well into both your previous answers about infrastructure in Georgia and transportation specifically. So, to you, are there realistic chances of MARTA expanding both inside and or outside the perimeter? Would it benefit Atlanta and Georgia? And what would the environmental impact be?
The short answer is no. I support the expansion of Martyr, but I don't see it as a realistic things happen as long as public transportation is politicized. And that's just the honest answer. I think that Martyr unquestionably should have been expanded beyond the perimeter for a long time. We should have invested at the state level in public transit. I think that is better for the environment, it's better for our health, and it's better for Georgia's economy. I'll go back to the American Jobs Plan that President Biden has put out there, and over $150 million is going to be allocated to electric vehicles. The EV industry is growing at a phenomenal rate. But let's be very clear: there are a lot of folks that can't afford a Tesla or any green vehicle, and these individuals are relying on public transportation. But when you see in a state like Georgia, legislation passed that suppresses voting rights, right? And I'm going to give you an example to why transportation has been expanded and why policies in place have an impact on that. When you look at what recently happened in Georgia, where in a city or a county like Fulton County, where the majority of the vote are Black and brown folks, many of them that don't have transportation depend on MARTA to get to their voting location. And when you cut precincts from 33 precincts down to 8 precincts in Fulton County, from 55 precincts down to I think 9 or 10 precincts in DeKalb County, that's a huge problem. So number one, I think it's a voting rights issue. Number two, I think you expand MARTA because transportation fundamentally should be something that's offered to working people across this state. And let's be honest, the more cars we get off the road and the more people we can get on clean public transportation, the better it is for our environment overall. So I think it's very important for us to be able to understand that. But then, let's be honest, expanding MARTA, it's going to come down to the data. It's going to come down to studies. It's going to come down to really, really smart individuals like you all that's getting that great education at Georgia Tech that need to come up with ideas and innovative ways that can accelerate this process, right? What I would like to see is not only an expansion of MARTA, I would like to see a comprehensive and integrative plan for all 5 phases of Georgia: rural Georgia, middle Georgia, mountainous Georgia, suburban Atlanta, metro Atlanta. We need to look at every aspect. How are we connecting coastal Georgia, right? If you have so many people going from Savannah to Atlanta, from Macon to Columbus, from Albany to Raven County, Georgia, if you have people traveling all over the state, we need to make sure that that infrastructure is in place north, east, west, and south, right? If we're not doing that, then what we do is we're furthering the crippling effects of a lack of economic ideologies and policies that help individuals at the lowest rung of society at no detriment of their own. We prevent them from that. And what this does by expanding MARTA and other forms of public transportation is it gives people a way out of many of the communities that they're in to pursue other opportunities. When 88% of Georgia's prison population reads at a third grade level, that should fundamentally let you know that if we're not investing into education, into infrastructure and transportation, then we're going to continue to see the numbers of those living at or beyond or below poverty rise. And we're going to continue to see the uneducated and the unbanked left in a position where in a city and a school district like the Atlanta public schools, where if you are born into poverty and you are a student in the Atlanta public school system, you have a 92% chance of remaining in poverty. So we need to look at the expansion of public transit as an economic and social mobility opportunity. And I think that would be a very fair and just non-political way to invest into the kind of infrastructure that helps everybody and not just a select few based on their zip code.
Fantastic answer. Yeah, the intersectionality of environmentalism, racism, and economics, it's hairy, but a wonderful way of explaining it to everyone. Um, well done. So our next question, Georgia is one of the few states that has an elected utility commission. Not everyone from outside of Georgia not everyone from outside of Georgia might know. So could you go over what the Public Service Commission here currently does and how it relates to the environment and energy?
Yeah, five elected individuals based on what district they represent make decisions from a utility regulatory standpoint. This includes everything from your electric rates and your gas rates to what gas marketers can or will provide. Some folks have Georgia Power or Atlanta Gas and Light. Other folks have an electric membership corporation, EMC, or they have a MEAG, which is another form of a regulatory entity. I'm sorry, utility entity that's regulated by the Public Service Commission. So, when I ran for the Public Service Commission, it was for two reasons. Fundamentally, number one, most people don't even know the Public Service Commission exists. So when their utility rates go up, they don't know that there's a nuclear expansion called Vogtle 3 and 4 that's going on. That's $30 billion right now. I mean, it's 15 billion over budget. It's almost 6 years behind schedule, and we're paying for that. And so when people don't realize the political process, it's bad enough when people know that they can elect for governor and attorney general, lieutenant governor, but a lot of times people are just ignorant at no fault of their own to what those positions do, right? So they vote predominantly for mayor, governor, secretary of state, but then what happens is they don't realize, oh, Public Service Commission, right? It doesn't say Public Utility Commission like it says in some states. So most people see that and they say, well, I don't know what a public service commissioner does, so I'm just not going to vote for that race. And you mentioned earlier that, I received the most votes of any African American in the history of the state of Georgia. But the reality is, when you go into a 2022 midterm election and the Public Service Commission is no longer third on the ballot, but behind Reverend Warnock and John Ossoff, you now have to go 11 spots further down the ballot. And we all know that when you go further down the ballot, a lot of times you lose the benefit. One of the best pictures I'll paint for everyone on this call and those who will be watching is, when you think of the Public Service Commission, I want you to think of what happened in Texas during this recent winter storm, where their grid was not prepared for the inclement weather that happened. And that's a part of the role and responsibility of the Public Service Commission, working with utility companies around the state to make sure that there are mitigation plans in place, making sure that there are safety measures in place, making sure that as we regulate these entities, that they are submitting plans that determine how they're going to integrate these resources, what their portfolio is, that they're submitting reports. At Plant Vogtle, which I mentioned, there's something called the Vogtle Monitoring Report, that is supposed to be in place as a safeguard to understand the fiscal impact as well as the economic and the business impact of this expansion. But we have to understand how the Public Service Commission has to work in unison with our state representatives, both on the House and the state Senate side. So there are a lot of moving parts there. But what I want people to understand is, if you think about your gas, your electric, your wireless broadband, those are regulated by a small group of very powerful individuals, and those are your public service commissioners.
Thank you for that answer. You've been mentioning Plant Vogtle a few times during this. So we have a question on that. How do we balance the theoretical potential of nuclear energy with some of the real life impacts, like what we see at Plant Vogtle in South Georgia? And for those who may not know, can you explain some of the issues involved with Plant Vogtle?
Yeah, well, I already touched on a couple of issues with Plant Vogtle. The cost overruns, obviously. We're always sold a narrative that these types of expansions and construction projects bring more jobs, but it also brings poorer health, and when not monitored correctly, it brings extreme poverty. It's important for these constructions to take place, and I understand that. By no means do I think we need to, not consider the economic impact that they have. But what's economic impact if we're not alive, right? I mean, we're literally seeing the latter part of a social justice case where George Floyd was murdered for the world to see, and his last words were "I can't breathe." Eric Garner's last words were "I can't breathe." And when you have individuals that can't breathe around the state of Georgia, not because of their interaction with law enforcement, but because of an expansion of a facility and many other facilities that are contributing to the impact of our health, we have to really understand that. Plant Vogtle, to be fair, the first two constructions, one and two, that is very, very outdated technology. What I will say is when you look at entities that exist, like the Nuclear Regulatory Committee, when you look at, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and you look at other entities around, like the Union of Concerned Scientists, there is new technology that, to be quite frank with you, while I am against the expansion of Vogtle and especially the fiscal challenges that we faced, what I can say is new technology has made me more optimistic about what these expansions can provide and the safety and the security of it. That being said, I think we need to understand that this is a much larger problem when we're talking about nuclear expansion, opportunities as well as challenges. And we need to understand that cyber warfare is very real. I grew up in Columbus, Georgia. My dad, was special forces. My father-in-law had top secret military clearance, and my grandfather was a diplomat to the United Nations. So I come from a family that understands security. And one of my biggest concerns about, what we're seeing with the expansion of nuclear, not just in Georgia, but nuclear around the country, is the safety and security of our grid. That's another thing that the Biden administration has put into their infrastructure plan, securing the grid. So, it's not that it's a hard question to answer as much as it's more of a complicated question, because we're trying to find a medium between doing what's right for the community, for the environment, and for the people in which we are elected to serve. But then also looking at industry that is very profitable, but quite frankly keeps the lights on. There are a lot of negative things that I can say about Georgia Power and Southern Company, but there are also some really good things that I can say about the fact that we're not Texas. And I'm very proud to say that when the lights go off in Georgia, they come back on. And so we're proud of that. But as we begin to see more extreme weather and we see more of a compromise on our grid, I think that opens the door, back to your question about the Green New Deal, for more investment in the community solar in the state of Georgia, investment into more renewables such as wind technology, and quite frankly, more of an investment into renewable energy technology, especially on college campuses like Savannah State University and Georgia Southern, which are on the coast, but also Georgia Tech. I think I heard somebody mention aerospace engineering. I took my son to NASA Ames Research Center in California, and they're using aerospace engineering to monitor climate patterns. I mean, these are the kind of things that we need to focus on and invest into around the state. That was a long answer.
No worries, it was a good one. Thank you very much. Um, Taking a step back from all of these questions, we'll probably take a step right back into them afterward. Um, how did you get involved in local and state politics?
You know what? That's an interesting question. So when I was in college, I went to Clark Atlanta University. I was My trajectory was in the music industry. I had an internship for Radio One. I had a chance to intern with Radio One for about 2 years, and then I worked for Universal Records and Arista Records. And I really wanted to be a music executive, and I met iconic figure, a gentleman by the name of Maynard Jackson, who was Atlanta's first Black mayor. I met my current mentor, Reverend Gerald Durley, who introduced me to John Lewis, and Reverend C.T. Vivian, and Reverend Joseph Lowry. And I began to, be taught from the civil rights community. So I went from being a college kid that thought he was going into music to organizing my peers at Clark Atlanta and Spelman and Morehouse and Morris Brown. And I began to organize on campus and do a lot of different work. And as a result, it opened up doors for me to be involved in the civic process. I was appointed by former Democratic Secretary of State Kathy Cox to be on the Student Advisory Council when I was a student at Clark Atlanta. I was appointed to the Supreme Court Commission on Marriage, Family, and Children under the leadership of former Supreme Court Justice Leah Sears. And Leah to this day is a good friend, but she opened the door when for someone that didn't have a law degree to serve on the to serve on the Supreme Court Commission. And then I helped, after I helped Shirley Franklin be elected, and work with Shirley on, restructuring Fort McPherson after it closed, and working on her anti-human trafficking initiative. I met a U.S. Senator called Barack Obama, and as a result of working on his campaign and doing some good work, I got a chance to work on 2 or 3 White House initiatives that opened up a lot of doors, and it made me understand that my role, my voice, and my ability to communicate could be really well served in the political space. So I think it's a combination of having good mentors, but I'll give this piece of advice to anyone watching. You have to be proactive. There were a lot of organizations that I wasn't invited to, and I went on my own. There were a lot of events across the country that I didn't have the money for at the time, that I put gas in my car and saved up and had a hotel room, and I went, even though I may not have had a ticket for it. But I think politics, anything in life, is about sacrifice and risk, right? Like, what are you willing to sacrifice to attain what you desire to have? Many of your parents have sacrificed a lot to make sure that you can make it through college. But then as an adult, what are you willing to risk? Everyone may be saying, hey, the right thing to do is work for this company that is has a F minus on the environment, but you'll make a lot of money, and you'll be able to pay back your college debt within the first 2 years. I mean, that sounds very attractive, but are you willing to risk everything for what you believe is morally and ethically right? And I think that I was very fortunate to have guideposts in my career that I was able to get advice from. And this tie um, I received about a week and a half ago. I don't know if you guys can see it, but this is a tie of a gentleman that recently passed away. His name is C.T. Vivian, and he was one of the most iconic figures of this American Civil Rights Movement, and was one of Dr. King's lieutenants. But he was one of my mentors and one of my friends. And there was never a time that I asked a question that he wasn't willing to give me an answer for, and it meant a lot to me. So.
Thank you for sharing that inspiring trajectory, and condolences for your loss. Um, yeah, so our next question, this will be the last question of our prepared questions, and then we will go into the Q&A. What is the potential of the Georgia Public Service Commission to help the people in Georgia?
That's probably the easiest question that you can ask. Education. I mean, plain and simple. We can't have elected officials that campaign publicly and govern privately. I mean, that's really what happens. People, and I say this about John Ossoff and Reverend Raphael Warnock, who are both friends. The one thing that I admire about both of those gentlemen is that they've kept their word thus far. They campaign and said we're going to be accessible, and I have personally been at least 2 rallies where they've shown up. One of them for a Stop Asian Hate rally, another on a call for many from the African community that happen to live in Georgia. These individuals are governing the way they campaign. Right now, Reverend Warnock is working his butt off around the country to make sure that we have voting rights in place. And so I think that the Public Service Commission has to get from behind these closed doors and get into the public, host town halls. You guys are college students. and you're a part of an organization and you have the capability of doing a Zoom meeting, why haven't we seen 5 or 10 of these Zoom meetings during the pandemic when people's lights were getting cut off? Why didn't we see these town halls to explain how the stimulus plan provided $90 million, $900 billion? I'm sorry, $900 million for utility protection. We don't even know how much of that money was allocated to Georgia for folks that were up against their lights getting cut off. There's a gentleman that was in Griffin, Georgia, who was a diabetic, whose power got cut off and he couldn't refrigerate his insulin because his power was off and he couldn't do it. Why don't we have leadership that's out front instead of just having secret meetings with utility executives? So I think education would be my answer to your question.
So great answer. I totally agree. Thank you very much. We will move on to some Q&A questions from our audience. First one, in many regions and sectors, we have seen divides between labor unions and environmental activists, for instance, in the natural gas or nuclear industry. What specific steps, in your experience, have been effective at earning the trust and support of organized labor for GND style policies?
Go to them in and out of an election year. Again, it's education. Um, I don't think people realize that one of the biggest failures, and I'm saying this as a gentleman that ran as a Democrat in Georgia, one of the biggest failures of the Democratic Party of Georgia is that we're very good asking people for their vote during an election, but we do a poor job engaging those individuals outside of an election year, right? Like, and I don't mean that in a disingenuous way to throw anyone under the bus, but let's just be honest. We don't see a lot of Democratic leadership around the state of Georgia unless there's a major election. I mean, that's just the nature of politics. Even on the Republican side, I'm sure many people would say the same. The problem that I have is that we campaigned, not just in Georgia, but Democrats campaigned against Trump for 4 years, right? Trump isn't going to be on the ballot in 2022. He may have an impact, but we have to start meeting people where they are. So if I were in a position, to be able to have the ear of more of our Democratic leadership around the country and in Georgia, I would say 3 things. Number one, let's go on a listening tour, right? Keyword listening. I would go around the state. We got 159 counties. Why don't we break it up into 15 regions over a 6-month period? And why don't we get a Democratic delegation, whether I'm from your district or not? Why don't we get North Georgia Democrats down to Middle Georgia? Why don't we get Middle Georgia Democrats to Coastal Georgia? Why don't we get Atlanta Democrats from inside the perimeter to outside the perimeter, go down to Columbus, Georgia? Why don't we start going around the state and listening and building strength and support? I think we need to do a better job of organizing around the state, and that will, I think in effect have a great impact on many of the opportunities that are in front of us. But if we're not going to people and engaging them, then what we'll continue to have is hundreds of thousands of registered but inactive voters around our state. And as we see in this last session, Republicans are doing everything in their power to suppress the vote. So we need to make sure that we're doing our part to educate individuals, groups like yours. You guys at DSA continue to fight on the income inequality piece, continue to fight on the wages piece, continue to fight for these things, because these are areas that we're lacking behind in. Because it's one thing to talk about voter suppression, and it's another thing to talk about the infrastructure. But to a hungry person, they're focused on their next meal, right? To a person that has 5 bills and they got to put gas in the car, they want to make their check. They want their paycheck to increase from $2.13 to, depending on tips as a waitress. So we got a lot of work to do, and we've got to fundamentally put ourselves in a better position to provide for people and not just campaign to them.
Thank you very much. Our next question, and this is something you've touched on throughout the talk, but what can be done to reduce the energy burden faced by low-income communities in Atlanta?
I think that question should be asked differently. I don't think it's just the folks in Atlanta. I think that communities, we have to stop making policies that are contingent based on zip code. plain and simple. When you have uh, one or two utility companies that determine everything in our state without competition, then even the idea of community solar is no longer contingent on what the desires and needs of the people are. If you were to ask Democrats, Republicans, Libertarians, Christians, atheists, Muslims right now, do you want cleaner energy? I guarantee you down the board, they'll say yes. The problem is a lot of times and too often on the other side, they weaponize politics. Now we do it too. I'll be honest. A lot of times we overly use the cultural stuff and we don't really speak to the issue. And we've got to do a better job with our messaging. That's a messaging point. But I think what the other side does is they weaponize things. Like they say they don't talk about the opportunities with solar. What most of the time what they say is you don't want AOC's Green New Deal, right? Without telling them the pros and cons or what they would do different, right? You don't want this you don't want Obamacare. Okay, well, what do you do if you have a pre-existing condition? Okay, if you don't want this plan, what are we doing to offer something different? So I think we have to do a better job of educating the community and letting people know that in cities like Atlanta and counties around Georgia, again, 159 counties, we have to look at this state from a needs-based perspective. Where there are higher cases of asthma, we've got to do environmental assessments of why. Because if a kid, just I'm going to ask you this question, not to get an immediate response. I'm going to throw a question out there. How many work days are missed because of asthma, and how many school days are missed because of asthma? Right now, I'm putting that question out there because what if you look at the national averages, there is one of the largest impacts to attending school and attending work can be quantified by the amount of individuals in that city or that state that have asthma. This is proven information from the Centers for Disease Control, the EPA, and the EPD, and the Department of Energy. Why? Because they track and monitor this based on productivity. So I think in Georgia and in Atlanta, we have to begin to rethink how we're going to deploy energy and how we're going to protect our most vulnerable communities, especially as it relates to environmental justice.
Thank you very much. What a great answer. A couple more questions now, and this is something you had touched in a previous question, but I will ask it again anyway. How is the continued resistance to MARTA expansion affecting our approach to a more sustainable transportation portfolio?
When you say our approach, who do you mean? Like our as in the general populace or as in a specific group?
Based on the wording of the question, I would assume that that would be like one, your commission, as well as just, I guess, the greater Georgia area.
So ask the first part of the question again.
Yeah. How is the continued resistance to MARTA expansion affecting our approach to a more sustainable transportation portfolio?
I mean, everything is politicized. I don't think there's a way to really answer that question in a fair way. I think the example is there was a gentleman by the name of Tip O'Neill who was a house a house representative, a congressional house, I believe, out of Massachusetts. He was a Democrat, and he worked very closely with Ronald Reagan during the Reagan years, and he forged these relationships because he understood that it was in the best interest of the country to work together than to pick sides, right? And we're so polarized right now. I mean, I'll give you an example. I live in Forsyth County, Georgia. All right. Forsyth County, Georgia is one of the wealthiest counties in the United States. As a matter of fact, the last time I checked, we're the sixth wealthiest county in the United States. Okay. We're one of the fastest growing counties in the United States. We have the fastest growing Indian population in the United States, right? All these things that are happening, yet and still in a district that overwhelmingly went for Trump. You have a district, you have a community where Carolyn Bordeaux has become our first Democratic Congress representative in over 3 decades. And when you look at all of this with a population of 221,000 that will skyrocket to over 426,000 within the decade, when you have a county like that that says we don't want MARTA, We don't want public transportation. Where the hell are you going to put all those people? Right? I mean, if you have a county right now that has 200,000 and you're going to double it, look at what happened to Atlanta. Atlanta has no more land. If you want to build in Atlanta, you either have to knock it down or build up, right? Unless we're willing to just turn over Piedmont Park or Chastain, right? Like we don't have the land to be able to do it. So we need public transportation because we need people to have more accessibility, and we've got to destroy the myth that, public transportation is going to bring more crime. And look, if we have safety measures in place and we're smart about it, then we'll do the right thing in the best interest of our state, which will bring more opportunities. But if I'm a multi-billion-dollar company and I have to decide between Portland, Oregon, and Atlanta, Georgia, I'm going to probably pick Portland because they've been more progressive in their way to invest in the public transportation, right? We have to be very honest about it. I've never seen somebody break into a house, steal two 50-inch TVs and put it on MARTA. I mean, so we got to stop making it this, liberal versus, conservative boogeyman is in the room thing, and say, look, public transportation is in the best interest of everyone. Let's do it the right way. Let's invest into the infrastructure, and let's make sure that we're making plans that can take us into the future that we all deserve.
Thank you very much. Wonderful answer. Another question from the audience. What are your thoughts on nationalizing our power grid and broadband internet in order to deal with the inequality seen in our country?
I don't know that I would nationalize it. I think that somebody said to me one time that if you're going to drink the ocean, don't do it with a straw, right? Like, and what they're saying is you don't want to just tackle a huge issue with a one size fits all type of thing. What I would like to see happen is simple. We can do it right now, right? This Biden infrastructure plan needs to have three things attached to it. Number one, we need to increase the amount of dollars targeted specifically towards our most hit areas. Okay. Now, what I mean by this is there's money that's going to go out to expanding broadband. I would like to see this in a separate education package. So we have an infrastructure bill. I want to see a broadband education bill that can specifically focus on broadband in the most underperforming areas in the United States, right? And look, let's be honest. We're always fed this lie that the highest crime cities and poorest cities are Democratic run cities. I beg to differ. There are a lot of cities in Mississippi that are run by Republicans, and a lot of cities in Alabama and a lot of cities in South Carolina that don't have access to broadband. We need to work with the agricultural committee within Congress. We need to work with expanding technology and innovation. We do it under a comprehensive education bill. I think with that separate from what is already being done with infrastructure through the American Jobs Act, jobs plan, I think we need to take it a step further over a 10-year period. I think we need to consider investing upwards of $100 billion a year for the next 10 years. It's $1 trillion in investment into broadband education in our most hardest hit areas. Here's how you make it work. Number one, you work with corporate America, similar to what Obama did with Silicon Valley and expanding opportunities when we saw the rise of a lot of social media networks. Obama used it to pass bills that dealt with education and technology, and specifically around coding. Well, how about we bring utility companies to the table, right? Let's bring Southern Company. Let's bring Alabama Power, Georgia Power, Florida Power. Let's bring Mississippi Power. Bring them to the table, and let's say this. Since you are a profit-run organization, you're shareholder-driven, right? We're not going to tax you, but what we're going to do is we're going to put an incentive out there, similar to how the airline industry has a gasoline incentive where they have a 40% reduction. We'll say this: as you expand opportunities, number one, we're going to target where you expand, and we're going to make sure that you're reinvesting into those communities. But number two, we're going to increase minority participation, because when you expand solar, if the companies that are bidding for those contracts are specifically not Black and brown owned or operated, then what we have is the economics of a community that's predominantly African American or Latino. We're not seeing the economics stay in those communities because we're seeing contractors come in and take away those job opportunities and the potential. So the last part of that about investing into education is we need to make sure that as we're planning this, we're doing it in a way where we're aligning our K through 12 education with jobs of the future. The problem we're facing in America right now is that the majority of the jobs, the majority of the career paths are college students, like those of you at Georgia Tech. The majority of those job tracks that people take are going to be obsolete by the time they graduate, right? It's like telling a kid right now to go into gasoline car manufacturing. Well, look, autonomous driving in the next 6 years is going to make 3.5 million jobs in America obsolete. So we don't need more kids manufacturing cars that run off of gas. We need kids that understand battery storage, battery technology, solar. Like we got to change the trajectory if we're going to have an impact. So again, long answers. I'm trying to pack a lot in, but there are a lot of things that we need to do right now because we no longer have the luxury of waiting 20 years to do what's right. We got to do it right now.
Awesome. Thank you very much. We have two more questions, but they're very similar, so I'm going to try and combine them. Considering Georgia Tech is a public institution under the authority of the USG, what has been your experience organizing in your community and across Georgia? And what would be your advice to us students here at Georgia Tech, both how to help our community, to help our school, both of those considering we will be, a lot of the questions that we have will be fighting the USG.
Prior to the Montgomery bus boycott, 11 people, to my knowledge, sat down in a room and they made a plan for how they were going to shut down a bus system for 116 days. And it was successful. The reason why I bring up that example is if I were starting any organization from scratch, if it were me, if I were a sophomore or junior at Georgia Tech, the first thing I would do is I would go off the radar. I wouldn't have a social media presence, no Snapchat, no Instagram, no Twitch, no Facebook, none of that. I would take a year behind the scenes to build the infrastructure and the coalition, because too often, like if you look at social media right now, even this group, as good as a conversation as this is, we should have 2,000 people on this call, because you guys not only are an organization that represents a lot of people, but you guys are offering a platform where we can have a discourse and hopefully implement our ideas into the current form of politics, right? So what I would do is I would take at least a year of my college career to implement the right infrastructure on the ground of a campus and to build a database, right? Most people don't realize Facebook was originally the Facebook, right? Started for Ivy League schools to be able to communicate. Well, we need that same concept. We need a social engagement New Deal. We've been talking about the Green New Deal. We need to rethink how we're engaging people, right? If I started a new organization, the first thing I would do is not do anything that's being done right now, because I would want to listen and pay attention and build a coalition of people that can execute those ideas. That sounds crazy. It sounds nuts. You're like, what the heck are you talking about? But for me, I think what that does is it allows you to create your own blueprint rather than trying to take something or a platform and interject it. Are you going to lose some time doing that? Of course. But if I were on a college campus, I would be building this out for us to be effective, but also to pass something on to those that came after me that they would have so that they can accelerate rather than be stagnant. Because when you guys leave, if you haven't replicated yourselves, then the folks that come after you are going to have to start all over from scratch. You can leave all the notes and all the ideas you want, but if you don't teach people and prepare people, then they will have to have the same struggles and the same challenges and adversity that you have because they just weren't prepared. We've got to do a better job of leaving a playbook that everyone can implement into their program or organization.
Absolutely fantastic. Thank you very much. That was a wonderful answer. Do you have any advice for someone who is interested in getting into local politics?
Yeah, just find a good fight and get in it. It's that simple. Find a good fight. I mean, I see Aiden has, my sign and Devin Pandy's sign. I mean, Devin and I are, we got a lot of common, but we also have a lot of different ideas. It doesn't have to be John Ossoff or Reverend Warnock. It might be, there's a kid that I know getting ready to run for school board. He's 22 years old. He's getting ready to run for school board in Atlanta. Find a good campaign, find a good person. Here's the thing I want people to understand. Everyone's not going to be a candidate, right? Everybody's not going to be Stacey Abrams or John Ossoff or Reverend Warnock or Barack Obama. Everybody's path is different. Some of you are going to be campaign managers, communications directors, organizers. Some of you are going to go from being executive members of DSA to running nonprofits around the country, right? My advice to everyone that wants to get involved is find a good fight, find a good race, find a good cause, find a good rally, find a good opportunity, and just get involved. Doesn't mean you have to be the speaker. You don't have to be the organizer. You just might want to go and listen. Just go take some bottled water. Go and sit down. What I did, the best decision I ever made when I was in my early 20s, I'm 42 now. The best decision I ever made was I literally would go to meetings where I would be the youngest person in the room, and I would do it intentionally because I fundamentally understood that there was a gap between the information they were sharing and the people that it was getting to. Right? Because if everybody in the room was in their 50s and 60s, and here I am at 23, then what that meant is that I had an advantage over everyone in that room. And I was also getting information that I can take back to my community. So I would just tell everybody to find something to get involved with, commit your time and energy to it. And I guarantee you'll see a change sooner than you might expect.
Awesome. Thank you so much for all of your answers, your advice, and your stories. These are definitely things that we as an organization, YDSA at Georgia Tech, can definitely take to heart. Um, thank you. They were very heartfelt, and we really, really appreciate your time. Snaps to Daniel Blackman for coming to speak with us today. If you have any other last minute thoughts before we sign this off, you're welcome to share them. I'll give the floor back to you for one more second.
Oh, was that for me?
Yeah, yeah. If you just had
Oh, I'm
any other
sorry. I
last things
thought
to
you, I thought you
say.
were saying to anyone that was listening. No, I would just say continue to educate yourself. I just watched a series on HBO called Exterminate All the Brutes on HBO Max, right? Like I mean, you know, the last piece of advice I would give everybody is to educate yourself, right? Read. I mean, don't just go to school for your degree. Go to, I remember when I was at Clark Atlanta, I wrote a paper on Niccolo Machiavelli, and it's because I wanted to learn different. I read The Art of War by Sun Tzu. I read, The Alchemist. I read, I learned about the civil rights movement. This book that I have here. It's on Black history, and this book that I have here is on Team Arrivals. I mean, I've got, everybody's might not be an idiot like me that likes to just read books all day, but read audio books. Like, I mean, seriously, like educate yourself out of your comfort zone, learn cultures. When you have a chance to go on vacation, don't always make your destination Miami or Jamaica. Sometimes you might just say, you know what, I'm gonna go to Ethiopia. I'm gonna go to Sao Paulo in Brazil, and I'm gonna learn about capoeira and I'm gonna learn about culture and identity. I mean, just I challenge you while you're young, while you have energy, while you may or may not have kids. Do what you can do while you have the energy and the health to do it. The last thing I want to leave everybody with is I would be remiss if I did not say to take care of your mental health. I am a strong advocate in burnout. I believe that anxiety is real, depression is real, and sometimes you get so caught up in the midterm and in the final, and in the activism and organizing and the politics and the rally and the march and the George Floyd case and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery, and then you wake up one day and you don't know why your blood pressure is up, right? So I would just advise everyone to check on your friends, check on yourself, and there is absolutely nothing wrong with self-care. If you need a break, take a break, but don't allow the work that you're doing for the good of the world to lead to the detriment of your health. Thank you.
Thank you so much for all of those answers and for taking your time to come and speak to us today. For anyone watching, this has been YDSA. If you're interested in our club or what we stand for, we meet on Mondays at 6 normally, but today obviously we gave our time to Mr. Blackman. Thank you all so much for being here. I move that we will close this meeting, and I hope everyone has an absolute great day.
Thank you so much, Mr. Blackman, and thanks everyone for coming.
Thank you so much to all of you. Ruby, Ryan, Gracie, Aiden, thank y'all. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a great evening.